Hello, I'm Dr. Angie McCartney.
And I'm Ruth McCartney.
Welcome to TeaFlix,
where each episode's intimate conversation features a fascinating guest across the spectrum of Beatles world, pop culture, Grammy winners, the music industry, chefs, producers, music stars, actors, and more. So bottoms up and join us as they spill the tea on TeaFlix. See if we are live. It says we're live once again.
Are you sure that's not fake news?
Don't start. I'll pinch you and see if you're live.
Oh, I'm live, just about, yeah.
Hi, kids, and happy Tuesday. I'm looking at what a bit of a bugger of a haircut I gave myself yesterday. I'll have to fix some of this.
Have to do it with your glasses on next time.
I'll not use the kitchen scissors next time.
Bacon scissors. Yeah.
Anyway, so Katie Kapurch is our guest today. She is a bona fide professor of English, so I better watch me P's and Q's, me pints and quarts, that stands for. And she is the author of several books and editor of some. And today we are going to be talking about her latest book that she has co-written with Jon Marc Smith, with the foreword by Cyrus Cassels. And it's a project that is very near and dear to our heart, as you all can imagine. It is called Blackbird. I know it's probably backwards on your end, but it's a beautiful book. And Katie, being the ultimate professorial researcher she is, we even are included, or Angie is, and my grandmother. So without further ado, crowd, kids, are you sitting comfortably? We'll begin. And here is Dr. Katie Kapurch. Hi.
Hi, Katie.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Welcome to TeaFlix.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here.
A load of things we want to ask you. So my first question is, which Black artists do you feel were had the most profound impact on the Beatles during, in their formative years, in the early days?
And to add to that question, because it's the first one, how did you and Jon Marc come up with the concept of the R&B influence and the Beatles? And then which Black artists do you think had a great influence?
Well, thank you. That's let's see. I'm gonna have to take that question one at a time. So I guess, but those questions they do go together. I think that I would say that Lord Woodbine is a really important figure in the Beatles' early days. Mm-hmm. Of course, Chuck Berry, of course, Little Richard. But I think one of the stories that we tried to bring forward in the book are the kind of hidden figures. And Lord Woodbine, a calypso artist and club owner that they knew in Liverpool, had such a huge impact on shaping their playing and introducing them to other artists in the Liverpool 8 district. So I want to give a shout out to Lord Woodbine, who's pictured, of course, in the famous War Memorial picture. Yep. And of course, I'm interested to hear what you think as well. I could stop there, or I could then answer Ruth's question.
Yeah, I think let's give the folks a little background about, how was it you or was it Jon Marc? Were you sitting around one day and said, here's an angle that's never been covered as far as, we've talked about it on TeaFlix. Liverpool was a seaport, so we have Europe's first Chinatown and great Asian food, and we have great America, Caribbean and West African music. We have a big Liverpool 8 Toxteth, a big community. And we're all just Scousers. So it's a real melting pot. And I just wondered where you guys came up with the concept for the book, because it's really unique.
Well, it started somewhere different than we ended up because we were actually one of the first things that we wrote and we presented at the Sgt. Pepper conference that Walter Everett hosted at University of Michigan. And we talked about Prince and Michael Jackson and how they were influenced by the Beatles. And so out of that project, if you've read Blackbird, then you notice that Prince and Michael Jackson aren't really in it much. No. Because we started with this idea about how do contemporary post-Beatles Black artists, how are they continuing to dialogue with the Beatles? But we realized we really couldn't tell that half of the story without telling the first part of the story. Yes. And we had some Black musicians who told us that, because they took issue with our original title, which was like how Black artists remix the Beatles. And they were like, wait, that there's part of that is missing. And we were going to have that in it, but we realized that the story had to be foregrounded in a different way. And really it was always coming back to people asking questions about Blackbird, the song. And we'd written about that before too, but then we realized that these bird songs are so rich and so pervasive, and that there is a very special affinity for birds in British English culture. And in African American music. And so then it became the kind of bird just like fluttered to the front. And that's our touchstone. And we were kind of maybe resisting it at first, thinking that the Blackbird idea would be a chapter, but it was the book. And
the book,
And so we keep returning to the Blackbird touchstone throughout the book, but then try to bring in other kinds of under-recognized, the recognized, which the Beatles recognized, speaking with so much love for some of their American influences. But the Lord Woodbine chapter, that one was, we thought important to write because we wanted to recenter the Liverpool Black artists.
Right. What did the Beatles ever acknowledge themselves or comment in those early days? I know they did latterly, especially John, but did they comment at all that you're aware of in the press that they did about their early African-American or Caribbean musical influences? Or was it just kind of part of that whole melting pot, or was it, a mixture of both?
We don't find a lot of the Beatles are, I think because America is this great golden shining light, it's the symbol of the industry, that when they're talking about Black artists, they're often emphasizing the American influences. And I think sometimes maybe we take for granted where we came from when we're young. And maybe they haven't been able to consciously process as much of what they were taking and exposed to. That's like maybe a positive reading of it. I do think we don't get a lot of credit for those early folks that they were hanging around with in Liverpool.
And obviously, a lot of our regular viewers will know we've spoken before about Bob Wooler, who was the Cavern DJ, and he was, because it was illegal to be homosexual in those days, he had to be very, very careful and in the closet, but he would, had American boyfriend dates that he would meet, and they would bring over records, and they were merchant seamen, and, merchant marine. And then he would go and play Chuck Berry at the Cavern Club. And then John and Paul would say, can we borrow those records and go home and learn them, So again, God bless Bob Wooler, had he not had a certain lifestyle that exposed him to that music coming across the Atlantic, we may never know how much influence he had in the whole thing too.
And now another thing that interested me, you explore the idea of racialized. Oh, God.
Get your glasses on.
I made some notes and I've got the wrong glasses on this morning. Racialized listening. Can you explain what that means in the context of Beatles fandom and music criticism?
Which part are you talking about in particular?
Racialized listening.
When you talk about racialized listening.
When we think about understanding our listening experiences, and we think about, like, if we're the Beatles, is this in relation to maybe like John realizing that Little Richard was a Black man?
Yes.
Right. And that maybe shapes the way that we hear the music when we understand that background.
I see what you mean. Yes.
Because music is really colorless, isn't it? You can listen to anything and you don't necessarily know what, background somebody is from their race or I mean, yeah, gender, obviously you probably do, but these days that's off the table too. And I think that's the beauty of music. It's just the great global equalizer. Of course, there's ethnicity in music, and you could probably guess that, African chant singing is probably African people, but it doesn't mean to say that it has to be.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that pop music is able to constantly find new audiences and be transformed. Jon Marc and I were just talking about Kraftwerk and the way that Kraftwerk is this European sound, this emphasis on being European, but then becomes so important to early hip hop. So this just the exchange is, I think what became almost, I mean, it was a challenge to write the book because there's so many different pieces and parts and cultural conversations happening, to try to trace those without being reductive, without reducing it down, but also to show these very rich exchanges.
Right.
Yeah. Your book actually opens up a powerful context, recontextualization. That's a big word for me, especially in the wrong glasses. Recontextualization of the Beatles' legacy. What initially inspired you to explore the influence of Black musicians on their sound?
Was it from Walter's answering the question sort of backwards, talking about Prince and Michael Jackson, and then reversing it 180 degrees?
Well, we love the music that we're writing about. I mean, there's that aspect of it.
Yeah, of course.
And I realized this is kind of my next book, which is about Disney and pop music with the Beatles and Taylor Swift and Beyonce. But I realized how much even I didn't realize had come from other sources. I grew up listening to the Beatles. I didn't have kind of a proper understanding of the order because the Beatles position Black artists as their princes. Like they're like these princes came and saved us, but then princesses are kind of the one in the center of the story.
Yes.
So then we tend to focus on what the Beatles did and maybe relegate Black artists to a source rather than active player. So I kind of that was like a kind of long ago part of it, but it was something that stuck with me because I had been exposed to the Beatles first. I hadn't been exposed to their sources first when I was first hearing it.
Of course, yeah.
So that was a motivation, and of course, the more we talk to Black musicians, the more important foregrounding the history became.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I often liken, our regular viewers again will know, I often liken music to my other passion, which is food. And it's all about ingredients. And there are traditional Italian or Chinese dishes, but there's so much fusion now, and there's so many different ways to incorporate and mix things together. I think that what the Beatles and the music they were exposed to as kids, basically teenagers, because of people like Bob Willer and where they lived in this multicultural city, it was sort of a basket of ingredients for them to cook from. And you'd never really honestly be able to trace back if it was a spring onion or a chipolata, would you? But they had this huge basket to pick from.
Yeah. That's and McCartney uses that metaphor, the melting pot metaphor, and Hunter Davies, and I guess that's where you kind of run into a problem with McCartney. Nowadays, he's trying to be like, this one thing led to this one thing, and draw a straight line. But Hunter Davies, their first biographer, said creative people often don't know where they get their ideas from.
Yes. No.
Yeah.
And so in a way, that kind of leads me to what I wanted to hear from Dr. Angie, which is about Blackbird, which is your story. I really wanted to hear you tell the story about your mom and how that all.
Yes, well, I was married to Jim, and my mom was elderly. She lived across the other side of the Mersey, and she'd been ill. And one time when Paul was with us, he said, why don't we get your mum over here to stay with you, and you can look after her and make a fuss of her. which we did. He organised an ambulance and everything, and she actually came to stay with us on her 80th birthday. And lots of people had sent flowers to Rembrandt for her. And they were placed on the stairs because we had a 3-way staircase that went up to where she was going to be staying in the back of the house. And as she opened her eyes, the ambulance men were carrying her in one of those canvas slings up the stairs. And she opened her eyes and she said, "What's this all about? I'm not dead yet."
She thought it was a funeral.
She thought she died and it was a funeral. Anyway, she got quite a bit better over the time. And one night, in the middle of the night, Paul drove up from London, came to stay. And, you know, he was still full of beans and we were all fast asleep for like 2 or 3 hours. And he looked in our bedroom and he looked in Ruth's and we were all well away in the land of Nod. So we went round to the back to my mum's bedroom, tapped on the door and opened it and said, "Are you awake, Edie?" And she said, "Well, I am now." So he sat on the bed, he just needed somebody to chat to unwind. And he was asking her about her sleeping habits and everything else. And she said, "Oh, well, yeah, I mean, there's this flaming bird that wakens me up every night." And she didn't say flaming either. But
it began with an F, though.
Yeah. And so he, you know, asked her all about it. And she said, "Well, I'm usually just about nodding off and this bird starts singing." So she said, "It's about now, actually, this time." So he said, "Hang on." And he ran downstairs and got his brother Mike's Grundig reel-to-reel tape. It was a big clunky green thing. And sat on the end of the bed. And I opened my mum's bedroom window. And sure enough, shortly after the Blackbird started its nightly concert on the roof of Jim's greenhouse where he grew grapes
just outside the bedroom window, yeah.
And he recorded it. And that was that. And
it's not the recording you hear on the record. No. EMI replaced it.
But. Yeah, but that, as far as, you know, he said, "Wow, that's quite something, you know." And whenever I would hear the song, I'd remember that was it. And somebody sent me a studio tape, which I've still got.
Cassette. It's in the bank.
It's in the bank in a safety deposit box. And it's Paul in the studio saying, "This next one's for Edie."
Dedicated to Edie, and he does it over and over and over
again. He does it about 3 times.
Yeah. He's trying to get it right. And the opening chords are kind of complicated on the notes.
Yeah.
And he says this, and you hear his feet tapping, and he says, "This one's dedicated to Edie." Because Edith was my grandma.
Yeah.
I know.
So that's my version. There are others.
But, you know, the record labels and the PR people will have it their way, and they'll write it to be more politically correct and put out press releases. And,
and of course, in Liverpool, people called their girlfriend their bird. It was a term of endearment. "Oh, my bird," you know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it was thought of as being a black lady, a bird, a girl.
So it's such a great story, and it humanizes Paul McCartney in a way that that I think he's, you know, this, like, he's in his 20s.
Oh yeah.
And he's like all up because he's used to his like London nightlife, and here he is come home talking about birds. But I think that's such a great story because it also underscores McCartney's own love of birds and his childhood love of birds.
Yep.
As like a bird watcher himself, that her talking about the blackbirds, the noisy blackbirds, would resonate with him.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely. We just lost internet, just telling the crowd we're back. Spectrum just took a dump, had to restart. Thank heavens it kept the link. And sorry about that, Professor Katie, we are back. I have a funny Blackbird story myself. I was seeing a lawyer friend of ours once upon a time. Gosh, it was probably 35, 40 years ago now, called Gary Gilbert. He worked for Manat when it was Manat Phelps Phillips, Rothenberg and Tunney. I'm that old that Manat had that many partners.
Yeah.
And we were in Santa Monica, and I had a meeting about publishing contracts or something with him. And we were going to go downstairs to the coffee shop, and his secretary knocked on the door, and she came in with this ashen face, and she said, "It's a FedEx for you from one of the Beatles companies." And he's like, "Oh, wouldn't you know it? Ruth's sitting here and I get a letter from, one of the Beatles companies." I don't remember the details, but he opened it and it was a letter exploring the legalities of the opening lines of Blackbird. Blackbird singing in the dead of night, take these broken wings and learn to fly. And they were like, your band, Mr. Mister, who had a song called Take These Broken Wings, take these broken wings and learn to fly. So they were like, it's a little close for comfort. We don't like that. So I said, I think I have the answer. There's a Barnes & Noble downstairs next to the coffee shop, isn't there, Gary? And he's like, yes. And I said, give me $20 petty cash. I'll be right back. I went downstairs and bought Khalil Gibran's 14th century. Why is the name escaping me? Khalil Gibran's, oh my God, his most famous book. Don't know. Menopause, in one ear, out the other. The Prophet, it's called.
Yes.
Oh, that's right.
Right. And I go downstairs, I buy it, I take it back up, and I put it on Gary Gilbert's desk. And he's like, okay, hey, what's this got to do? I said, just open it and read the first page. And it says, take these broken wings and learn to fly. I'm like, it's closed.
Let's go to lunch.
Who borrowed it from whom?
Yeah.
Yes, Paul does not own the broken wing imagery.
No. That was an Arab poet back in the 14th or 15th century.
Yes.
It's kind of like the Golden Slumbers story. I was learning to play it, and it was a Thomas Dekker piece from, 500 years earlier. And Paul was thrilled because he's like, public domain, no copyright.
Right. Which is really like the pleasure of, like, the Beatles. What the Beatles do so well is they make the familiar unfamiliar, and then they make the unfamiliar familiar, and they put these things together that we know, but we hear them in a different way. And they got a lot of those skills from their Black influences and their white influences, because of course there's also, their white influences like Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis are also influenced by Black artists, and that the exchange is it's so dynamic that, I think we felt anxious a lot of the time when we were writing the book, because you don't want to, I said, tell a simple story. We're trying to tell a really complicated story and then hold on to the threads of it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the bird metaphor itself, the recurring image of the blackbird, it plays a key symbolic role in your book. Why do you think that metaphor in particular has endured so strongly? And as I ask this, we literally have two birds. I'm not even kidding. There's a mockingbird that's been tapping on this window, and there's a hummingbird tapping on that top window. As we are having this conversation, there are two birds
trying to get in.
Knocking on windows.
I'm not surprised. I felt like I did feel like birds were all around the windows when we were finishing up the book. There were birds just constantly, and I was like, it's a sign. But birds themselves, they're all around us. We take them for granted, but they are, incredible. They fly. Like, they have an ability that we'll never have. And so that kind of very simple folkloric inspiration, people have been inspired by birds throughout human civilization. And so it's such a powerful image. I think, for an image that appeals to people who are imprisoned and oppressed and enslaved, it's just such the Flying Africans folkloric tradition is so profound. And it, it stretches from these folkloric songs and stories that are sung by enslaved people in the Americas, and then it transfers into gospel music, and then it's infused in pop so much so that you can find bird songs simply everywhere. But that really deep motivation, as a kind of song of inspiration of freedom, that you'll fly away from this place, if not in life, in death. I mean, it's a pretty powerful spiritual message about life and death and hope and what's possible and what might only be possible in death. And so, and that's important, that it's not just random. It does come from enslaved Black people in the Americas singing these songs and telling these stories.
Right.
And someone is mentioning birds in Native American music. And yes, the raven, especially raven folklore, so another Black colored bird, being extremely important. Yes. It's great.
And I think for us groundlings, it represents some kind of wonderment and freedom to just one day I'll fly away. You know, it's.
And
just,
I always wonder, if you live in a tree, why on earth would you sing? What would you have to sing about? That's what they do every morning. We're blessed, actually, with a lovely range of birds.
Yeah, we have great. If we were quiet enough, we would be able to hear both of these birds tapping on the windows. It's quite incredible.
Yeah.
They must know
they want the attention.
You've got Katie, let me in.
Yes, they must know you're here.
Yeah.
So you had a question here.
Yes. So, yes, you and your co-author, Jon Marc Smith, present this idea of transatlantic call and response between Black musicians and the Beatles. Could you give our listeners an example of how that musical conversation unfolded, how it evolved?
The dialogue between the Beatles and Black music.
Right. You describe as a transatlantic conversation, right?
Yeah. I mean, the Beatles are foregrounding their influences on their own for early records.
Yeah.
Especially, and the girl groups are like really near and dear to my heart, but especially with all those Black girl group covers that they do on the first two records. There's 5. Maybe the most memorable, well, I don't know if you can call it the most memorable one. Whenever you start ranking things among Beatles people, then everybody wants to disagree.
Yeah, I know.
Boys, sung by Ringo, being just this incredible song where they maintain the gender, singing about boys. It's just incredible. Right. And then as they are not covering songs anymore, I mean, McCartney has been he's been very specific about how James Jamerson's bass playing influenced his melodic bass playing. Yep. And it never goes away, but it never goes away. In some of the discourse, sometimes it's tempting, I think, to be like the Beatles became their own thing, but by the end, they're, being accused of plagiarizing Chuck Berry with Come Together again. So, and it does open up lots of issues about, what's borrowing, just like your example with Mr. It's like, what are things that human beings, gravitate toward and no one can possibly own.
Not to get too birdy, but throw in another bird metaphor, it's chicken and egg, isn't it?
Yeah. That's
oh, yeah. Don't give it.
Thinking of your question, I think the conversation, and of course this is not a thought original to me, but the conversation becomes clear when Billy Preston joins them. Yeah. And that was really, I think, we had a lot of really special, just kind of profound experiences that we never knew that we would have when we were writing this book, like getting to interview Betty Lavette and Martha Wash and some of the musicians that played with Billy Preston. But one place that we went to, because a lot of this writing was during COVID, but right before COVID, we went to visit Victory Baptist Church in Los Angeles, which is Billy Preston's home church. Oh, yeah. And the community there are still people like Johnny Pearl Knox, who sang with him in choirs. She was best friends with his sister. And the pastor and his family have just been like so incredibly welcoming.
Oh, yes.
To us. We still go back and visit. I mean, they've really taken us in. It was on a personal level, it was just a very profound experience.
Yes.
On a researching level, they gave us a firsthand experience of what this music was and is. I mean, this is a living tradition in their church. So you're hearing them sing and interact in the way that it would have been when Billy was there and when he was a small child, like leading the choir. And they still had, when we went to their church in 2020, and sadly, tragically, the church burned down a couple years later. And that, has just been a very difficult for the community to overcome, but they are overcoming and they are rebuilding, and they're still there doing their ministries. But they actually had this little footstool, which was really old. Oh, wow. And they had that, and they said this had to be what he stood on, because this is it.
They always called him Little Billy Preston.
Little Billy.
Yeah. And the organ that we got to see and hear here was his organ. And Miss Johnny Pearl referred to it as Billy's organ. And so that was, and then I really like seeing where he was situated in the church space.
Yeah.
He had a view of the preacher. He had a view of the entire congregation, and you really get a sense of the ways that being a church organ player attune you to audience, and how the music shapes the message, and how the message is shaped by the music. And it's this fluid, collaborative, and really intensifying process. It's just really incredible. I mean, I feel like, there's lots of people who make pilgrimages to Liverpool, and rightly so. But this is another place, like a living place, where you can encounter the kind of music that led to the Beatles' music. And if you're thinking specifically about Billy Preston, where he got what he brought into the studio with him. So that's just was just an amazing. So fortunate and grateful for the experience.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough. We're good friends with Joyce Moore, who managed Billy and managed his estate, and she's going to be on TeaFlix in a couple of weeks, actually.
Oh,
talking about Sam Moore, her late husband,
who
we just lost at the beginning of the year, and she also managed Curtis Mayfield and Billy Preston.
Yes,
and she set up for me to be what turned out to be, we wouldn't know. But because he was taken into Cedars a few weeks later, I was the last person to interview Billy. And we went round to his house in Baldwin Hills here, right off Slauson. And it was very short notice. I had literally like 15 minutes in the car to write the questions. But there was this sort of level of trust there, because he knew, who I was, and I wasn't going to suddenly sell this to Entertainment Tonight or something. In fact, we still have the tapes. Again, they're in the safety deposit vault. And one of the stories he told me, which will, I'm sure, resonate with you, Dr. Katie, is that when he was little and on the way home from church, they would go past Ray Charles's house, because everybody in the neighborhood knew where Mr. Ray Charles lived. And so these little whippersnappers would want to talk to him, but they didn't have the courage and the guts. So they'd ring his doorbell, and when they'd hear footsteps coming, they'd run away. And he used to piss him off to no end. And so one time they did it, and Billy tripped on the step and his mates all ran off, and he's standing there stuttering and stammering. And Ray Charles himself opens the door and he says, "Yes, what can I do for you?" And Billy Preston's like, "Mr. Charles, I'm little Billy Preston. I go to school over here and I sing at the church up here. And I've been told I can do a really, really good Ray Charles impression." And Ray Charles said to him, "Little Billy Preston, we only need one Ray Charles, but thank you."
Not at all.
We only need one Ray Charles.
But he changed his mind. He changed his mind later.
Yeah.
Ray Charles did.
Oh, yeah, sure. But, he must have. I said to Billy, "How old were you?" He's like, "I must have been 8 or 9 years old or something."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a great story. I love that story.
Thank you, little Billy Preston, but we only need one Ray Charles.
Yes.
I used to, when we lived in Nashville, I used to travel a lot. And for some reason, I would run into Ray Charles in airports all over America. And he was, on the sort of the passenger cart thing you can request for, blind passengers or wheelchair passengers or whatever. And I had twisted my ankle at one stage, and I kept seeing him all over the place. And I said, "Can I catch a ride from gate?" I was changing gates, and I'm sitting on the back of this thing facing out, and who's sitting next to me? but Ray Charles. And I said to him, you know, Mr. Charles, I've seen you in no less than 7 airports in the last 11 weeks. I swear to God, I think you're stalking me. And he just turned around as if he could see me and said, yes, ma'am, I am. So I don't know, it was such a coincidence, but you know, he had such a great sense of humor. Paul, our friend Paul Moody is saying he knows that house. Paul is a local to LA here. And Sammy is saying she's in Atlanta, and she's saying that she was lucky enough to get to see Billy with the Ringo's All-Star Band, because Sammy does all of Edgar Winter's world online. She's the social guru of the Edgar Winter world.
Oh, okay.
Edgar was in Ringo's band previously, and so that would make sense with all of that.
Yes.
But let's move on to your question here, Ange, about, you know, the challenges.
Yes. Moving the glasses. I'm sorry about this. But no, how do you hope this book challenges the way fans and scholars approach the Beatles' legacy, particularly in the context of race and cultural exchange?
Thank you. That's a great question. I think that in a lot of the Beatles world, there's a tendency to say, well, the Beatles loved Black music, so what can be wrong? Or it's as simple as that. Yeah. And like, love is good, but there's also a lot of exchange. And in the Black community, that kind of love isn't viewed totally always positive, but rather as a kind of like, well, they took this from us, and then we didn't get credit or compensation. No. And so I think that's an important idea to hold on to. As an English professor, as a literature professor, the books that we are able to teach over and over again are the books that are complicated, are the stories that are complicated. Mm-hmm. And so in fact, the fact that this is a much more complicated story than Paul McCartney, you know, kind of wants to make it into. He wants to like sew it all up and make it very neat. Like, you know, this was the Bach party piece, and it was about civil rights. And like, and you know, he's like, that story has evolved for the last 2 decades, and he's added details. And that, in a way, is kind of what makes it fascinating to us as literature professors, because we're looking at his evolving story and seeing maybe some holes or problems. His intention, of course, you know, he wants to show his support for civil rights, which is still an ongoing issue. That is like that's worthy because he's not overly political in other parts of his show. No. So the fact that he continues to make that stand, but it isn't as simple as, you know, his story. So there are lots of other angles to look at, and really something that we keep kind of, Jon Marc and I keep talking about, is he's wandered into something that actually supports his story. He's wandered into this very rich legacy without even realizing maybe what is so like profound about what he's doing, because he's simplified it into a nice little package that he can communicate in gigantic stadium shows. Right. So I think, you know, if the Beatles are going to continue to be a topic of study, or something that is important, that these complicating factors are actually what make it like worthy to study and keep talking about, and thinking about in relation to like our world today. Yeah. So.
Well, and I think, don't forget, you know, it's not just part of the show that Paul talks about, you know, this particular, and I'll call it a soundbite. Mm-hmm. But when they were young, teenagers, early 20s, coming out of Liverpool, and, you know, February 1964 comes around, they get to JFK, and they're literally blinded by the light with the press corps and do a press conference. They were sort of told by Brian and the guy, you know, keep it short, keep it funny, keep it cute, keep it in little sound bites. And so when you're trained that young to deal with messaging and media in a certain way, it's really hard to break old habits, you know. So to have Paul sit down and extrapolate the whole Blackbird thing from end to end, and even maybe acknowledge, yes, recording the Blackbird on the end of my grandmother's bed, and which would explain why we have this cassette tape. He doesn't like to go back. He's a very forward-thinking man. He's not. There are always, I think, when I used to watch him just sit on the end of the couch or in the kitchen table at the bench with the guitar, you could just see he finds, even in chaos, he used to find this stillness, almost like he was a satellite dish, and he would be tuned in, and he'd just wait for the message and wait for the content, wait for the artistry. And so I think he is so, I can't speak for him. I don't know, but it's always occurred to me that as an artist, he is like looking for, it's like SETI. He's looking for the signal from the future. The past is the past. You can't change it. It is what it is. Fortunately, his has been very successful. But he's always got his eye to the future, even at, 83.
Yeah, he's a mod. He's a classic mod.
Yeah.
Future oriented.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book includes artists. I want to drill down a little bit for the time we have left. Artists from Florence Mills and Leadbelly to the Shirelles and Aretha Franklin. How did you guys go about choosing which figures to highlight? Because it's such a long list.
Yes. So we actually, we do have a second part of we have a volume 2 with the Prince and Michael Jackson, some other material that didn't quite fit into the Blackbird, like touchstone trajectory. It's Blackbird for the person who just asked the name of the book. So we looked at some, so for example, Billy Preston's role in the Beatles obviously, warrants a major attention to him and his Blackbird, his cover of that song. And so we followed that story forward. So when you look at Billy Preston's Blackbird, we discovered that Sylvester, the Black Disco Queen, who famously performed at the San Francisco War Memorial Opera House, backed by Martha Wash and Izora Armstead Rhodes, who later became the Weather Girls. You all know them from It's Raining Men. And Martha is still recording and still performing.
Great.
She's amazing. And got to interview her. So the COVID time was so, bad in so many ways, but for the book, some of these artists were available to talk to me on the phone, because they had time and they had been they were supposed to be out performing, but since everything was shut down. So I really, we got some amazing stories from Martha, who performed in that show with Sylvester. And then she directed me to Eric Robinson, who is a musician in London still today. And he explained that he was so nervous during that show, he was the keyboard player, that he played the Billy Preston riff because Sylvester kept kind of asking for a riff. And he just played Billy Preston's Blackbird as the riff over and over and over again. So that was kind of a line of influence that hadn't really been charted to show how the Beatles are central to the conversation, but they're also not necessarily central to the conversation. And so that was a kind of fascinating line to take. And then also Betty Levette's version of Blackbird, she turns it around and sings it in first person. And then she also gave me really incredible stories about the choice to do that, and also her own kind of role, as she talks about being in her 5th career because she's had so many stops and starts. And so she's
a bit like this one.
So those, so we tried to look for paths, thinking about birds and like a flight path, that would kind of provide coherence to the story with, versions of Blackbird also linked together within the story.
Right,
Yes.
that's amazing.
Mhm.
But you've also, I mean, we've been focusing on Blackbird, which is your latest tome, but you've also written on or worked or collaborated on other books too, New Critical Perspectives on the Beatles, which you and Ken Womack, Professor Womack, brought together. And that's a range of essays exploring the band's cultural impact. What surprised you most during that particular project, how the Beatles are studied in academia today as a thing?
Yeah, that was kind of the beginning of thinking more about needing conscious, like theoretically informed discussions about race and about collaboration, and trying to get into the more complicated aspects of that. In that book, Jon Marc and I have kind of our first writing on Blackbird, where we look at it in the context of Paul McCartney's storytelling, but also his collaboration with Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson,
Right.
and thinking about these kinds of really, I mean, it's so Paul McCartney's brand to be optimistic and to like provide a kind of golden shining light, even when that's really difficult and you sort of have to reimagine a history in order to get that.
Right.
So we talked about that romantic, capital R, romantic impulse and how that shows up. Also, I wrote about how girls use the Beatles as kind of like dolls. That's a different chapter in that book. And that was sort of the beginning of thinking about contemporary fans and how they use the Beatles like you would use dolls, put them in different scenarios, interpret them the way that the player wants to use them. Yeah. And that was really the first seed of what became the Disney. I'm kind of torn about the title right now. It's either going to be Disney Plus Pop or the Disneyfication of Pop. That's the title.
Disneyfication, like that.
Okay,
yeah,
that's the one that keeps getting the most votes.
Two reasons. It's very memorable and it sounds like supercalifragilistic Disneyfication. And
that must be what's resonating with people.
Yeah, maybe.
Right? It's very pop culture. And the word Disney is probably copyright and trademark, but Disneyfication probably isn't yet.
That's right. That's right.
And I'm not a lawyer, and I don't play one on Facebook.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. The premise of the Disney book, part of it is that the Beatles, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, they operate like Disney, where they show you the mirror of yourself. They give you the reflection that you want to find.
Yeah.
And they're rich enough, but also like empty enough, but then rich enough again to contain all these like multitudes that people can find. So you often find people talking about the Beatles like, well, this is the version of the story that I like. Right. And that's because there's all these possibilities that have been offered, kind of like what Disney does. Disney has often functioned as a kind of reflection for especially the US viewers. Yeah. But you can find in it what you want to find. So those were kind of that book is like I think it's behind me. It's that red one. That book is kind of the beginning of that one as well.
Yeah, I think with Disneyfication is a great word because they've gone from Walt Disney's Orange Groves to cruise lines to Epcot to theme parks to merchandise characters to voiceovers and books and everything. Mm-hmm. But I also think that as huge as Walt Disney and Disney is and was in that world, if you mix, again, back to the ingredients, if you mix a bit of that Disneyfication with a bit of the organic fact that Astrid gave these Beatle guys, and then they adopted it, 4 haircuts kind of the same, right? And then Dougie Millings put them in 4 suits, kind of the same. And then we get this doll image through pop culture. I don't think we'd have Boyz II Men, NSYNC, K-pop, any of that without those people who influenced the Beatles. They're box dolls. They're like Funko Pops.
Yes,
you can put a box, right? So you can draw a line between. They're all curved lines, it's going to wind up looking like an FBI board with all the red threads. But I think you can draw a line between the visual image that, the Beatles brought to America, the mop tops, and, where we are now with pop culture. And I think Disney corporate has, sucked up a little more than a little of that ingredient.
Yes.
Agree?
That's so well said. Thank you. That's definitely that monochromatic hair too. Even like as the Beatles as influenced by Disney films. It's pretty amazing to go back and see those references. And of course, McCartney has most of them because he's often referencing Bambi and Dumbo as, movies about mothers, but also, animals.
Yep.
So, yeah.
No, absolutely. So you're working on the Disneyfication book, but there's another book that we should briefly mention, which is The Beatles and Humour.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And this one just came out on paperback.
Oh, great.
So it's much more inexpensive than it was. It's as an academic book, it gets released at this large price point for libraries first, and then it comes down. So it's now in paperback, and I'm thrilled about this collection. This was also a kind of COVID project. It started with my co-editors Richard and Matthias. We were actually it was COVID, so we were all on lockdown, and we were joking about all the funny vests that Paul McCartney has worn over the years, and sending pictures of them to each other.
Yeah.
And then there's a different word for vest in England. Is it
waistcoat?
Waistcoat, yeah.
Waistcoat.
And so we were just laughing about that, and that turned into a collection about humor. And we tried to think of maybe ways that, because what you said earlier about the sound bites was so smart. They have these great sound bites that are just in this culture that we live in now, where people are just scrolling by, and all you have time for is like 3 seconds.
Horrible.
The Beatles did that, and so it's I think one of their longevity strategies, really, that they probably didn't even realize they were doing.
Elizabeth,
we've got chapters about Yoko, so we tried to do things that were both the things you would expect in a Beatles and Humour book, but also maybe things that you wouldn't necessarily expect, like Yoko as being a kind of a very funny artist, and having a sense of humor. And then we've got more about the Beatles and Black artists in here that I wrote with Mike Aline and Walter Everett, who's been on your show. So yes. Yeah. And we have Beatles as clowns. We've got lots of, and then I wrote about the Beatles and Shakespeare and Lewis Carroll, trying to kind of put those ideas together.
Very interesting. Well, and again, it's about, Elizabeth's just saying Scousers, Liverpudlians.
Yes.
And there is a difference, have a sense of humor, because we grew up in such, especially Ange, born in 1929, suffered years and years of Hitler's bombing, lived outside. If you didn't laugh, you'd shoot yourself in the foot, right? So, and then, the Beatles, I always refer to them as, war babies, because they were all born during the war. They grew up in this horrible, gray, smoky, horrible, black and white, bombed out world. And then at the end of the decade, it was at the end of their career decade, 69, 70, everything was, Technicolor and psychedelic.
Glorious Technicolor.
Right. And so, they transcended the whole visual medium in our minds, from the black and white press conference, in February of 64, all the way to the Yellow Submarine, right?
Yes.
Which is quite incredible. Yeah. So you've given us a teaser about the Disneyfication book. Where can people find you online, and then follow you and follow all your projects?
So if you want to follow me on social media, I'm just Katie Kapurch, just my name. Just have to type in the name and I'll come up. And then I also have a website, which is katiekapurch.com. So, and I update the website when I have new, articles or interviews that are kind of like meant for the public. And then also when I have the new books, when I have a new book come out, I do update it. So
Great.
Definitely. I'd love to have people follow me and ask me questions. I really enjoyed this. This was
I'm sorry about the technical glitch.
That's fine.
We'll cut that bit out before we put it on YouTube, obviously. Yeah. But as our regular viewers will know, or you may not know, but Angie has a book out called Mrs. McCartney's Liverpool Limericks and Other Random Irish Haikus. And so she put pen to paper over the weekend. And if you're sitting comfortably, we will read you your personalized limerick.
For me?
Yes.
For you?
Yes. All of our guests get a limerick. Absolutely.
And you get 2 verses, actually.
You get 2 verses. You got so much going on. We couldn't fit it in 5 lines. So slowly, and a 1, 2, 3. Dr. Katie and Jon Marc took flight. With Blackbird they set wrongs to right. They proved with a grin that the Beatles' deep spin was powered by black music's light. Professor Kapurch took a stand with Blackbird so thoughtful and grand. They traced every song to where roots belong, black artists that shaped the Fab Band. Ta-da!
Thank you. That was so sweet. Thank you.
So welcome.
So sweet of you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, again, sorry about the Spectrum just decided to take a nap, but I think we all stayed on. We all hung together. And thank you so much for your time. Everybody, if you rewatch this, across the bottom, you'll see the scroll, and it's got Katie's website on it. And thank you so much. Do go rush out and buy Blackbird, and also the Beatles Humour now available in paperback everywhere you get your books. But have a look on katiekapurch.com first. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank
you, Dr. Katie. And we will definitely stay in touch.
Professor Katie,
Professor
if you don't
Katie.
mind. Excuse me.
Thank you.
Ph.D.
Ph.D., yeah.
I'm the only one that doesn't have a doctorate here, aren't I?
Yeah, you ought to feel ashamed.
I know. I'll just go jump off the roof. I'll be fine. All right.
Thank you. This was so lovely.
It was.
Enjoyed
Absolutely.
It.
We will definitely stay in touch. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers. And we will see you kids all of a
this
sudden.
ain't tea.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stay well, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks for tuning in to TeaFlix, and check out Dr. Angie's books, Organic Teas and CBD at mrsmccartneysteas.com. Toodle pip!